Meanwhile, the New Democrats are preparing all candidates and campaign staff for a snap federal election. In an internal memo obtained by CBC News, the party's national campaign director wrote...
So CBC got it too, guys. So mysteriously leaked memo that CBC and CTV somehow mysteriously received.
Taking a page from Doug Ford's playbook, the Liberals believe they can turn this crisis into a political benefit for them. For that reason, I am asking all campaigns to be prepared for an election call to come as early as March 10th.
And that means spending money. So people aren't going to just say this without any weight behind it. Chances are one of the NDP, maybe like they probably knew it was going to get out when they sent it out, but chances are someone just blasted it, right? And sent it out to everybody. But it's just like this whole thing to me seems like it's really going to happen at this point, regardless of what, unless Karina Gould gets in place apparently, or Chrystia Freeland. I don't think either of them are going to win. I feel like they're purposely making themselves seem unappealing, or they're just that unappealing in general.
Mr. Carney has reached out to any opposition leaders to discuss emergency legislation coming to Parliament to deal with Donald Trump's trade war and the impact on Canadians. She continues, "We believe the rumors of Mr. Carney calling a snap election are credible." Adding, "The Liberals believe that they can turn this crisis into a political benefit for them. I'm asking all campaigns to be prepared for an election call."
You know, I never thought about that. And that like, that's just it. Can't let a good crisis go to waste, right, guys? Like, geez, like that, you know, I don't know why I didn't see this coming. And it makes a lot of sense now, seeing it put in front of me like this. And like, honestly, just to hear we're actually going to have an election coming very soon. Like, who knows? They might change their tune if they start dipping in the polls again. But hope everyone's enjoying their Friday so far. Just me for now. Saul will be joining when he can, probably in like within an hour, I assume.
To come as early as March 10th. Here's Mark Carney's response.
Yeah, you know, Liberal leadership hasn't even like been declared yet, so we also got to remember that we don't even know for sure if Mark Carney's going to win. It just seems like he's being appointed almost.
You know, you never take a decision before you need to take a decision. And so nothing is pre-wired. Let's see what the situation is in the...
Yeah, a Great Dominion, I saw those polls as well. That's what I'm saying. If they start to continue to dip again in the polls, who knows, they might back out of this. But at this point, I think with the way the polls are, it makes sense for them to want to do this, not to mention capitalize on the whole trade war and try and utilize that, right? If they cling on to power and postpone an election, at least Mark Carney's smart enough to figure out that's not going to go well for them. So I'm glad to hear that at least they have some common sense to understand that an election is needed ASAP, like ASAP. It's basically a referendum on how we're going to deal with the whole trade war.
The middle of March, and do what is best for Canadians, and the government will do what's best for Canadians. If Parliament needs to be recalled for certain reasons, it will be. If it makes sense to get a strong mandate at that point, that is what will follow.
You know, I think that all parties, quite rightly, are probably getting on election footing. All parties have seemed, except for the Liberals, have been calling for an election for a number of months now, and the Conservatives for even longer.
Well, yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, right? Is like, were we really on our way to an election? Because Jagmeet Singh has just flipped and flopped, and he's flopping and flipping again. And now we're hearing, like, you know, I don't believe that Jagmeet Singh is going to call an election, like, ever. Like, I feel like it will have to be the Liberals calling the election. Like, I don't think Jagmeet Singh even has it in him to call an election. Like, I don't think it's possible. Like, I was watching old footage of him from September when he ripped up the agreement 5 months ago. 5.5 months ago, this Jagmeet Singh ripped up that agreement, and nothing has changed.
Longer than that. You know, narrowing polls, right circumstance, in ordinary times without Mr. Trump as a trigger. Yeah, I think that going early would be very much on the table. So there's going to be a lot to talk about over the next month and a half anyways.
Yeah, and Tom, it's interesting because we did talk about some of those polls earlier this week that do show, the Leger poll particularly, showing that if Carney is the leader of the Liberals, that he's at a dead heat with Pierre Poilievre. But I wonder whether or not you think, you know, like this is something that, of course, CTV News obtained, but these types of memos don't get out by mistake. Do you think Jennifer is being...
Yeah, like this is a tactic. This is their way of letting the public know what's going on. Because I guess they're trying to take some heat off it. Because the NDP dipping in the polls right now. So
Jennifer Howard is being prudent here, or do you think that she, really is onto something?
Well, first of all, from all the people who've worked with her since I left, nobody has anything but good things to say about Jennifer Howard. She's top notch. She was a former minister in Manitoba. She's she's at the top of her game, and she's in the right place. I can share with you that on the French media, I do a lot of French television, radio, and write in one of the major French paper. People are taking the 14th, 15th of March as pretty well the date when this thing's going to be called, and everybody is assuming that Mark Carney is going to win this thing. So is that going to come to pass?
Yeah, and like Great Dominion was pointing out that everyone thought Peter MacKay had the CPC leadership in the bag as well. So we'll see what happens, right? Like Mark Carney hasn't won this race yet, and from what I understand, there still will be an obstacle where he will have to be an elected member of parliament before he can assume title as prime minister. So he's going to have to basically, I guess, yeah, like from what I understand, like I don't think he can be an interim prime minister if he's unelected. But correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I'm very conscious that Michelle was absolutely spot on. You've got to be very careful as you answer that question, not to give the impression that you think that this thing is already decided. But we can assume that it's almost decided. And I think that that Carney was careful, because the way things have been going, it might be necessary to have a mandate from Parliament. But one of the reasons why they want to go early is that Mark Carney's not in Parliament. He doesn't have a seat. And so there's the big issue of the mandate, which is the thing that he talked about. There are a lot of other things, that
I was just talking about, actually. For once, I agree with Tom Mulcair a little bit here.
move you towards the conclusion that the Liberals want to go as quickly as possible. And, one of them is as prosaic as the fact that to get the House back in, you need a throne speech. And if you really want to get 8 million Canadians who have French as their first language angry, put in a Governor General who a few years in, still can't deliver a speech in French. And I know it sounds like, irrelevant to a whole bunch of people, but it's the type of thing, Carney and the Liberals have been tailoring their messages. They've been doing very well. He is super well liked in Quebec. But all of a sudden, Mary Simon would have a role in that election that I don't think anybody wants. And so I think that there's a whole bunch of big and small reasons why the Liberals are just going to want to go as soon as possible. The big decision for them is short campaign or long campaign. I remember Harper decided a long campaign was in his favor against Justin Trudeau in 2015. He was
Yeah, what is this super confidence in Carney? Honestly, I think it's the Conservatives ramping him up for a while have shown people they're worried about him, right? Or that they're concerned of him, or, why have they been talking about carbon tax Carney for over a year now? They've been branding him, right? Like clearly, for whatever reason, he is their biggest threat, and that's how they see it. And I feel like that's why everyone wants to rally behind him. I think that's part of it, is that anyone who doesn't like the Conservatives, they're going to vote for Mark Carney now because they just want Carney to win. Like, I feel like a lot of NDP voters are ditching the NDP to vote Liberal because they don't want Poilievre to win. Like, I know someone in that situation where they would vote for Mark Carney in the next election because they just don't want Poilievre to win, and they think that Mark Carney has the best chance. Mark Carney's not even Liberal leader yet. And they're already planning on voting for him as prime minister, for prime minister, right? Like, it's like in the next election for another term, no, let alone, within their own Liberal Party elections, in their leadership elections. So it's just crazy.
Was dead wrong. His assumption was the more Canadians saw Trudeau, the more they would find him inadequate. Turned out that he was okay, gets through the first couple of debates, and people start saying, he's not as bad as you said he was. So it worked out in Trudeau's favor. Is it going to be the same thing with Poilievre, or do you give Poilievre a bit more time? Because I do know him. I spent 10 years across from him in Parliament. He's a very irascible character who can say very unpredictable things. And so that's going to be the
Tom.
big debate.
All right, Tom. It's just so funny. The more I hear Tom Mulcair talk, the more I just feel like he's a little snooty. You know what I mean? For NDP, he's a little snooty.
Amongst the Liberals, I think. But I think the rest of it is pretty well. As for the date that it's called, I think we're looking mid-March, pretty safe, before St. Paddy's Day.
Like, I feel like he's the type of guy who would try and quote like famous scientists in like poems just to sound smart. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I'll write that one down and hold you to it, frankly. But Gary, do you think that also maybe Mark Carney's looking at this as maybe the leadership bump that could carry him through it and carry that into a campaign?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I was actually thinking about back in, when Kim Campbell was first elected leader of the Progressive Conservative Party. My recollection is that around the time of July, the Canada Day weekend, she was actually much more popular than Jean Chrétien. But as time went on, it just got worse and worse and worse. And of course, we know that the Conservatives went down to ending up with just 2 seats, Jean Charest and Elsie Wayne. So I think if it is indeed Mr. Carney that becomes the leader of the party, I think it would probably be in his best interest to take advantage of the recency effect and the warmth and the attention that he's gotten during the leadership and try and convert that into electoral success. I think Mr. Poilievre will. We've seen him already shift from his Trudeau Singh cabal to now talking about Mr. Carney being really the consummate insider with the current government.
And this is what I'm saying, right? Is like Poilievre kind of, I don't know if he did himself any favors. Maybe like, do you guys think that Poilievre did himself more favors by branding Carney before he was really in the spotlight? Or do you think he didn't do much favors and just dragged Carney into the spotlight ahead of time? I'm just curious. Because, like, to me, like, I feel like, he was trying to brand him as carbon tax Carney for sure. And pointing out he was advising the Liberals, all that stuff, pointing out, like, in those committee meetings forever ago, like, he was shining spotlights on Mark Carney. Like, I just never understood why this guy, like, he was so worried about this guy, right? And for whatever reason, maybe it is because Quebec support's a big deal for a Liberal. Like, right now, with the amount of support the Bloc has, like, that can be taken away if people in Quebec want to vote for somebody else. So that's a huge, huge thing to get the Quebec vote, in my opinion, for a potential prime minister. And not to mention, Quebec's the second most populated province in the country.
Of Canada, the Liberal Party, and we'll see if that lasts. But I think the longer that you give Mr. Poilievre the opportunity to make that connection, the harder it will be for you as the leader of the Liberal Party to succeed in a general election.
Yeah, Robin, it's interesting because you add to that the fact that in the most populous province, they will have just come out of an election here in Ontario, and that's a strain on volunteers and campaign resources as well.
Yeah, and it's been cold and snowy in Ontario, and that's not much fun to try for candidates or volunteers or voters.
2 Cents thinks it was a good strategy to pre-inform Canadians as to Carney's dismal background. Okay, so. Robin agrees with you as well, from 2 of our members there. The cons aren't scared of him. Target your lead rival. It's not a new tactic. Well, that's what I mean, right? Is like, obviously they are scared of him and they are worried about him as their number 1 adversary. So that's how I take it anyways.
To go out in the snow. Do they want to go out in March?
Yeah, Great Dominion saying he's been talking about it for 2 years now at least. And that's what I've been saying. It's like, it's been a while he's been talking about this. Since not long after those committee meetings in 2021, he's been talking about this.
But I think Tom's onto something. Beware the Ides of March. The only thing is, Mark Carney is a central bank governor. So he is, by nature, risk averse in the sense that he is a very canny, careful, cautious man. But if the getting looks as good as it's going to get, then you'd be smart to maybe pounce. I mean,
yeah, and that's what I didn't think about. With, people can think, oh no, Pierre's slipping in the polls, but even if like there was an election tomorrow, like Pierre's still going to be prime minister by these polls. If these polls were an exact representation, if that's what you want, but it looks like the Liberals and the NDP together could really get in the way of the Conservatives. So I just don't think Poilievre, like our worst case scenario is Poilievre doesn't have this sweeping majority, right? Yeah, I don't know, dude. Like, I just think it's not, like, I don't understand why we can't say somebody's scared. Clearly they're worried about him.
Mike, you and I talked about this on the radio earlier today. Here you have the situation where...
Oh, Luca's got the quote from Mark Carney's book. All right. Western society is morally rotten, and it has been corrupted by capitalism, which has brought about climate emergency that threatens life on Earth. All right. I will search that excerpt in the book as well and read that whole chapter to get the full context. But there you go, Luca. You gave me the full quote. Thank you. There we go, guys. There's the full quote from Mark Carney's book supporting the theory that Mark Carney hates the West.
Where the just inflation gone because Justin Trudeau is gone. The carbon tax, it's effectively gone with whoever wins the Liberal leadership. Apparently, you have Canada is broken. That narrative just can't sell anymore. You can't. The flag waving is not now convoy protesters with F Trudeau signs. The flag waving is now people worried about Donald Trump and a 51st state push from here in Washington. So I think if you're Mark Carney and
yeah, Luke, I feel like I've read that already, that part of the book, because he talks about that and stuff. And I was mentioning that where he talks about corporations need consciences and stuff like that. But that quote doesn't necessarily tell me he hates the West. The one you said right there, that Western society is morally rotten, I think that's the best quote to support your theory there.
That Leger poll is very, very telling, and Leger is one of the best pollsters in the country.
Yeah.
And if they're saying that he's strongest against Trump, according to voters, if voters feel he's stronger against Trump than Poilievre, and I think, frankly, that would be the sense here in Washington. I think that they know who Mark Carney is. They don't know Pierre Poilievre. He's a lifelong politician from Ottawa. They know a central bank governor of 2 G7 countries. I don't think there's anyone in the history of the world who's been a central bank governor of 2 G7 countries.
That's what I mean. Is like everyone's just like creaming their pants talking about him. Like, whoa, the first foreigner in 332 years who was the governor of the Bank of England. It's just like, dude, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, his record wasn't the best as governor of Bank of England. People will try and argue and blame it on other things. I know there's people dispute whether or not the economic troubles that the UK had was his fault or not. You guys can figure that out yourselves with all the information online. And then we also have, just everything that he's done and advised Trudeau on, right? Like he needs to specify what did he advise Trudeau on? What did they listen to and what did they not listen to? Because right now he's pretty much their financial advisor on the record books. So all this spending, I don't think it's going to tone itself down at all. Like I think we're going to keep this spending. It might tone back a bit, but it's not going to cut back enough, in my opinion.